I currently have, I think, two Ukrainian families in my building. Or not really building, like just my. It's like a couple of buildings connected. So there's two Ukrainian families in, or at least like two groups of people in mine. Then there are also in the other buildings. I didn't get a chance to say hello yet to them. Also, the language barrier is such a bitch. Like, we're lucky that our languages are so close and like similar to one another, but at the same time, it just feels so stupid. Like, when it comes to like immediate contact, it just feels so helpless to like not be able to, talk. So, my Ukrainian friends are safe so far. I mean, obviously they left their homes. I have a lot of friends that are like Facebook friends, so I don't really keep in touch with them. So I just check when was the last time that they logged on Facebook to make sure they're okay. When I was in Ukraine, there was this one guy who saw me and my friend in costumes and he was like, "Oh, that's great." He took a picture with us and he gave us coffee because he was cafe owner and he gave us coffee and we were like, "Oh, that's so nice," and we drank it and we wanted to pay and he was like, "No, no, 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 that's for free." So long story short, we managed to track him on Facebook and it turns out that he's making meals right now for people for free and like for the army. So we sort of forwarded his contact and a group of like reenactors and friends and just people. And in a couple of days, this group raised so much money that they sent him 4 tons of food. Like they managed to get that food to him to make more meals. So, kind of the reason why I'm making this video is I keep seeing those stories online of like this guy loaded his truck and drove all the way to the border to help people, and I'm like, that's kind of what every single Polish person is doing right now. And it I don't think people know what is going on here. And I just wish people understood what's happening here right now because I have never in my life seen something like that.
Ktoś potrzebuje kamizelkę?
Dobra, wkładaj.
I to się nie kończy. Zobaczcie, ci wszyscy ludzie przywieźli nam rzeczy wyłącznie z naszej listy.
So my city started collecting food the day after the war broke and they had to stop, they had to like cancel it the next day because it was already too full, like they had no space, they ran out of space. Every, I don't know, half an hour I see those appeals of like, we urgently need food or like baby food or clothes or cosmetics, and like before I even get to a shop to buy that, they're already like, no, we're full, okay, we got that, thank you.
Setki osób przybywają. Mamy to na obiektach miejskich, ale także w hotelach.
A lot of the items like cosmetics, baby food, are like some stores are just sold out because so many people buy them to donate. I think the first time I broke crying was when I think it was like 2 days after it started and I wanted to visit one of my favorite cafes that I kind of suspected was owned by Ukrainians, so I went there and I went there with a thought of like, oh, I'm gonna ask how they're doing, etc. But like I saw their faces and I was just trying so hard not to cry. And I didn't say anything. I just, grabbed my coffee and I said thank you and I left because I just couldn't. And people have taken time off work to pick up people at the border. A lot of people I know, my lawyer friends or my healthcare friends, they're basically working for free right now. And I think at this point, pretty much everyone I know that has a spare room or a flat that they don't live in, they are hosting someone. And you know, ever since like the early reports of the racism happening at the borders, a lot of people went to the border crossings to like personally make sure that people are treated okay there and people are being taken care of, and to pick them up, take them to their houses, and then probably book them a flight home. Because a lot of those people, a lot of like international students are just headed to their home countries, whereas the Ukrainians don't have homes anymore, and it's so scary. Like just yesterday, my dad spoke to a Ukrainian lady and her daughter, and he was like, you know, so what are your plans? Are you staying in Krakow or what? And I think someone asked like, would you like to come back home at some point? And she was like, oh no, our village is burned, like the home isn't there anymore. And a friend has also told me, and I think she's probably watching, so hi, a friend has told me that someone she knows is hosting like a Ukrainian family and Ukrainian kids somewhere at the countryside, like at the Polish village, and one day a fire alarm went off in the village and the kids were just terrified. They were so scared. It's been less than 2 weeks and you already have a generation that has been traumatized for life. There's a lot of volunteers, and it's so hard to get anywhere because there's just too many people that want to do something. There's just so many people willing to help that it's really hard to get into all sorts of like organizations or just places to help. And on the other hand, because it all happened so suddenly and because it's just, you know, 1 million people came to the country in a matter of like over a week, we don't have the infrastructure to like manage everything yet. We don't even have the system yet. So it's such a mess, and there is no time to come up with that system because more people keep coming. And I think something that bugs me and that people don't really understand in what's happening is that it's like everywhere. You see people that are tired with suitcases and you're like, oh, did they just escape bombing? You see someone crying on the tram, or you see shop clerks and you hear that they have an accent and they're glued to their phones all the time, and you're like, oh, are they reading about their, you know, hometown being bombed? And you see children speaking Ukrainian and you're like, oh, do they have family left, you know? And you see men on train stations with backpacks and you can't help but think like, are they on their way there to fight? And one of my earliest memories was when I was, I think, 4 or maybe 5, and I was in Warsaw and I was in this park enjoying myself, and there was this huge line of green trucks. And I got a bit scared because I was like, what's that? And my mom told me like, oh, they're on their way to Yugoslavia. You know, they're bringing all the like humanitarian aid there. I think that's also like my first war-related memory that I have. And the next one was when I was like 8 or 9 and we went to a concert. I remember it was on a stadium. It was like people playing trumpets and stuff. And at the very end of the concert, they did like, they fired a cannon as a way to celebrate. And I remember seeing my grandma like all curled up and her hands over her ears because it brought back the bombs that she experienced during the Second World War when she was still a kid. I don't think people will grasp how familiar Eastern Europeans are with the concept of war. And I don't think people realize the generational trauma of the Second World War, especially in Eastern Europe, and sort of what it has awakened in us now. You know, every single family, like every single Polish person I know, has a ton of like heartbreaking stories from that time. And we just grow up hearing them all the time, you know. My grandpa was like 8 when he had to swim through a river escaping like Russian troops because they burned down his house. Imagine experiencing that at 8. And my grandma, on the other hand, had to collect like the coal that the trains dropped on their way. She would like go on the tracks and collect that coal, and she was actually caught by a German policeman, and like it's a miracle that he let her go because she was stealing. And my other grandma couldn't even speak about her experience, her like war experience. 70, like over 70 years later, she never wanted to talk about it. I also remember like back in early 2010s, which seemed like it was yesterday, but it was actually like almost a decade ago. You had all these terrorist attacks in Western Europe, and I remember like at some point you just lost track. You were just like, oh, here they go again, you know. And as awful as it sounds, and like as unfair as I think it is, you sort of get used to associating certain places with violence. And then it just hits different when it's at your doorstep. And you know, humans don't have the capacity to care about everything all the time. I wish we did, but we don't. We're like physically incapable of that. And I think it's okay to call out the government for, you know, being picky in who they decide to help, or call out media for, you know, not covering different topics equally. But to attack like regular people for caring, I just think it's stupid, you know. Most of my Polish friends are having like a really hard time right now because not only because before all this Ukrainians made the biggest minority in Poland, so we were like experiencing them every day. They were like a part of our landscape, but also because, you know, a lot of Polish people have Ukrainian roots. Even my family comes from Ukraine originally. But we're also having a hard time because in Eastern Europe, and I don't think that's something that people realize, wherever you go in Eastern Europe, as an Eastern European, there is this sense of familiarity. Like in post-Soviet nations, everything looks similar to a certain degree. Because it was sort of all state regulated, it was all partially dependent on the Soviet Union, and because there wasn't much else available anyway, so a lot of things like the architecture, the, I don't know, the pavement, the windows, the interiors sometimes, they all look the same in different parts of Eastern Europe. So it feels very, very familiar to visit these countries. And when I first visited Ukraine, I was sort of taken aback at how familiar everything felt. You know, the buildings, the food market, the people there, the old ladies. To me, it was like visiting a Polish city in my childhood. It felt like childhood to me in a way. And I think when you're Polish or Slavic or Eastern European, you just struggle so hard with understanding this whole thing and like understanding why a country so similar to yours culturally, you know, a country that a lot of us come from, a country that basically looks and feels so similar, is going through something like that, and ours is not, you know, simply because there's a border that separates us. I think at this point a lot of us and a lot of you have seen like the photos and videos of like the tall civilian apartment buildings that were destroyed. We look at like identical buildings here. We have identical buildings. We look at them every day and we ask ourselves like, why ours are safe and those like mere kilometers away are not. And lastly, to like anyone who believes this is all made up, I just hope you will wake up one day and just realize you've been on the wrong side of history this whole time. And I also think a lot about how, you know, Polish spies reported to the West about like the atrocities of the Holocaust and the German occupation, and like nobody believed us until it was too late. So like I'm always the first one to believe the victims of war, because it's just not something that's under anyone's control. It's just like pure evil. Anyway, this was all a very Polish-centered perspective. So let's move on to something actually beneficial. If you want to help, if you want to do something, I posted links in the description box that might be useful for you. Yeah, that's all.